Five more, uh, 5 more minutes about writing and publishing, because I learned a ton about that in this, and there's a lesson there for all of you, because there's a lot of experience here, and you might want to consider writing a book yourself. And then I'll spend the remainder of it about the book a little bit. So first, why I wrote this book. So you go back about 3 years ago. I woke up about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I went, wow, that was a really vivid dream I had. And I thought that would have been a great TV show. I was wondering if I'd maybe watch something on TV that night that influenced me. And I didn't think anything more about it. I went back to sleep, and the dream continued. Right back to where it left off, like you've watched an episode of something, and it was bizarre. I woke up in the morning and I turned to my wife, Judy, as many of you know her, and I said, I had this weirdest dream. She goes, no, I don't want to hear about it. You know, those weird dreams from your spouses kind of thing. And I said, no, I just want to run it past you, because it wasn't like weird. It was like very well structured for a dream. There wasn't any, I'm flying through the mountains kinds of thing with, flapping my arms. And so I explained it to her, and she goes, well, that's actually a pretty good story. And she said, that would probably make a good TV show or something. I said, yeah, it'd probably make a good book. Forgot all about it. That was the end of it. But then about once a week or so, I would wake up in the middle of the night with more of the dream. Some little piece that I didn't have before would fill in. And it just was really strange until I had a complete story, all in my head, and all from pretty much from dreaming. I just had to flesh out the connections and the little, additions. But as many of you who know me know well, I'm retired, and I resist doing anything that resembles the W word, 4-letter work. I'll say it. And so I was like, if I'm going to write a book, I've got to do research. I worked for the intelligence community, so anything I write along those lines has to be pre-approved before I can even give it to somebody else to read. So there's just a lot of W word work involved with it. So I'm like, I'm not doing it. Then about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, my old college roommate came down to visit. I hosted a bunch of my college friends down just this past August, but he was coming down early to make sure that Mexico was going to be safe for this group to come visit. So he was the recon for him. And while he was there, he just said, hey, how come you're not writing? And I do a blog, Pat the Expat, and that sort of scratched my itch, but I never wrote any books or any articles or things I thought I would be doing in retirement, because I was avoiding work. And he says, you're not doing, how come you don't do any of that writing? You should write. And I said, yeah, I had this story. He goes, well, what is it? So I run this story through, and he and his wife are sitting there, and they're like, jaws hit the floor, like, you've written the whole thing. You've got the whole story there. All you got to do is put it on paper. Why don't you write it? I'm like, well, it's research. And he finally said, well, why don't you just storyboard it? And again, we're good friends, known each other for 40 years. So he knew what buttons to push. He said, you really got to just storyboard it. See how much research it's really going to take. So I did. I put up some of those big chart pack papers you get, and you put them on the wall, and you start to write things out and put arrows and, connect things. And sure enough, it got me going well enough that I just literally sat down, and over the course of about 2 weeks, just blurted it all out of my brain, which, by the way, allowed me to start sleeping through the nights again, which was great, because I really was tired of that. So I got the whole thing done, and I started. So that's sort of why I wrote it. I had to. It wasn't a labor of love. It was a labor of wanting to sleep again without being interrupted. I then contacted several friends who had written books and said, hey, how do you go about doing this? Because what I remembered is you get in with somebody who gets you into a publishing house, and then there's a whole process you got to go through with editors and the like. And then there's always the self-publishing route, which, if you've ever ran anybody who did this, was kind of called vanity press. You go to a publisher who will print whatever you send them. And what they do is they say, okay, but you've got to buy 1,000 copies of your own book to make it profitable for them. And so you end up with this stack of books that you then give to your friends for Christmas or whatever. And it literally, yeah, it's vanity press was the accurate name for it. And it's just something you want to do so you can say you wrote a book. And I wasn't going to go that route. I just wanted to get this thing out of my head, and I did, and I was pretty happy with that. So I talked to them, and they said, contact an agent. Don't contact a publishing house. There's too many people sending books to publishing houses. You need to find an agent who will then be your in to a publishing house. So I researched agents, started sending my book to them, and I can't even say I got decent rejection letters from them. Basically what I got was no. And these were people who were advertised saying, I'm looking for new authors. Send me your book if you're a new author. So could not get into the front door on any of them. And I think part of it was post-pandemic, there were a lot of people who've been writing books and they were just flooded with manuscripts. And the harshest rejection letter I got was a person who said he specialized in spy fiction, which is what I wrote. And he was interested in people who actually had experience in the business. So I'm like, this is my guy. And I sent him, and he immediately came back. I said, I've got a 10,000 word manuscript. He goes, I don't know what I do with a 10,000 word manuscript. And I thought, what's he talking about? It's a typo. It was a 100,000 word manuscript. So I immediately emailed him back, said, I'm sorry, it was a typo in my cover email. It's 100,000. And he said, well, if you're making a mistake in your cover letter, you obviously aren't ready to be published. So thank you very much. And I was like, whoa, which as a former executive, I'm like, people send you a resume with typos, the same kind of thing. So I was like, okay, chalk that one up to experience. So finally, and this is the lesson for those of you who may have ever considered writing a book, I looked into Kindle self-publishing. So Amazon Kindle self-publishing, and you can see the website there. And the process was incredibly simple. You basically take your manuscript and you upload it to them, which is very simple. Usually it's a Word document. You send it to them. There's some formatting things they have to do to it. And then they ask you if you want to have cover art, how much you want to charge. It's just a series of questions. You just check the box. And at the end of it, they'll publish your book. And it goes out as an ebook. So whatever the price you send, you get a percentage of that in royalties. So if you send $6 and you get 40%, do the math. That's how much you get every time someone buys the book as an ebook. If you have Kindle Unlimited, they actually have a way to measure how many pages you've read. You get to read it for free. I get paid by how many pages you read out of the total. Which is kind of scary too. So I'm like, how do they do that? But somehow they do. I don't know how, but and then they had another option, which was you could actually ask to have the book published as a paperback or hardcover. But you had to do some additional formatting work there. But again, it wasn't very hard. It was a couple items I had to change and fix up. And there, the price goes up because, of course, they're printing it on demand. So when one of you orders the book, they print one and then send it to you. So it costs more because you're getting something tangible as opposed to an ebook. And my book went out in all three of those forms. So what I'm telling you, and I did do one intermediate step there. I had to, I contacted a reviewer, an editor, who does online editing to make sure it's in the right format, basically. And also checks things like, subject verb agreement or misspellings, things like that. And paid a flat fee. I think it was like $200 or $300 total. And they went through the whole manuscript, made sure it was in the right format. So when I submitted it to Kindle, it immediately accepted it. I had to do a little work with the cover art too, because they don't do that. They will do that for you. I wanted to do my own, because again, I was trying to do everything as cheaply as possible. I didn't want it to turn into, vanity press where I'm spending $1,000 to get a book out. So if any of you have ever thought about writing about your lives, your experiences, or anything else, I encourage you to just look into that, because the process was incredibly simple. And next thing you know, I had a book out there. And, I do encourage you to use an editor. I was an editor for part of my federal experience, and then I was able to use my wife, who's done a lot of editing. So we were able to get the book probably to 95% level, just all the little things, the typos, subject verb agreement, that kind of stuff, in addition to paying that person to do the online formatting. Because it does make your book that much better. But if you've ever considered doing it, I tell you to look into it, because I think it's actually a very simple process and doesn't really cost you much of anything other than your time. So if you've ever had interest in doing that, and if you want to ask me more about it later afterwards. So what's the book about? It's a little bit of science fiction and a lot of spy fiction. My brother-in-law, when I described it to him, called it sci-spy. I said, okay, that fits. Basically, it's a story about a group of analysts working at the CIA and a very, very, I can't emphasize this enough, very secretive program. And it's based on the concept that after 9/11, the CIA was throwing money at any project that would help them prevent another attack. And which is true. And the fictional case I bring up is that a special projects executive who's managing a bunch of these, hey, throw some money, see if something works, efforts, hired on a specialized doctor who went to look at the real files of a program called MK Ultra. And I don't know if anybody here has ever heard of that, but that was the CIA's experimentation with hallucinogenic drugs in the 60s. So Timothy Leary and all the folks who were doing much of that was done undercover by the CIA, because they were concerned that the Russians were going to use these drugs as mind control. They give you this and you'll do whatever they say. So they wanted to experiment with it. Highly illegal, terrible program, got the CIA in all kinds of trouble. But there were actual files and actual tests they did. My fictional case is this new doctor in post 9/11 looks at this material, is brought on to kind of take a look at it and see if there's anything there. And she discovers that there's a commonality with all the people who took these drugs, and that they had a very intense deja vu experiences. Everyone know what a deja vu is?
Yeah.
Okay, you know, you're doing something and you go, wait a minute, I've done this before. And the premise is that history is a book that's already written, but we haven't turned the page to tomorrow yet, right? We're still on today, but the page exists. And using these drugs, people can turn the page and look briefly, a limited distance into the future. And so this program begins to figure out how to do that, and then perfects it to the point where these streamers, it's called streaming, because the idea is that history is a stream of consciousness and you're stepping forward in the stream. They can go and see what's going to happen tomorrow, or maybe next week, or perhaps even 2 weeks out. Now, when you think about that, it's all kinds of interesting implications. I mean, what would you do if you could look 2 weeks into the future? What information would you go looking for? And if you're working in the intelligence business, what would you do about it? But remember, if history is a book that's already written, you can't change it. You can only know what's going to happen. So now it becomes a whole issue of what do you do with the information? I mean, you can't stop the 9/11 attacks on September 10th, but could you prepare for them? If there's a hurricane blowing through the United States, like last year, you can't send FEMA to North Carolina and stop the rain from falling, but maybe you can prepare differently so that there's more people where it's going to be worse. But you've got to do that kind of thing quietly, because if suddenly you're doing things anticipating the future all the time, it's going to become obvious that you know something about the future, which is why the program is so secret that only the 4 or 5 people who work in it, and 4 people in the government, the head of the CIA, the president, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and the Senate Majority Leader are the only 4 people who know. And they only read on their successors upon the approval of the person leaving. Now, in my book, we use current history. So all the events that happened since 9/11 are all in there. I don't use any current names. So it's always the president, the president, he, or the Speaker of the House, she. The reason I did that is I learned as I was writing this book that you can use real figures in your fictional work, but if they object to how they're depicted, they can sue you. And since I really didn't want to spend any money on lawyers, I just used the real events, but no names. So I can say it's a parallel universe. I don't know, that's not. But at one point, there is a president who comes on board who does not get read into the program because he is too dangerous to trust the information. You can figure out who that is. So it goes along, and the storyline involves various people taking actions using the information. And the constant theme, and I think this is what intrigued Barb so much, is if you can use the information, but you can't prevent things from happening, what does that tell you about? Is this just scientifically based? We've just figured this out? Or is there something else going on here? Because there's one character who uses the information to do what I'm sure will cross some of your minds. He buys a lottery ticket for $1 billion Mega Millions jackpot for a friend. And he does it to save this friend from doing something really stupid. Figures, hey, $1 billion will prevent something stupid from happening. It's not for me, it's for him. And he does it. But then when the team finds out about this and decides that they're going to test the hypothesis, because remember, at this point, they don't test it because the implications are too scary. You've all watched some time travel movie, right? The classic one is well, Back to the Future is a great one. I'm thinking of the one, The Twilight Zone. There's one where a person steps on a butterfly back in prehistoric times, and it changes all of history. If you change the past, you change the future. And Back to the Future had several instances of that. Nobody wants to test this theory about changing the future because they're afraid what it will do. And I even use the story from, some of you may have seen the movie Oppenheimer. I'm not sure if this was in there, but it's a true story. As they're about to test the first atomic bomb, the scientists are all standing there. They turned to one another and said, hey, what do you think the odds are that this bomb sets off the hydrogen in the atmosphere and destroys the whole planet? And they're debating, well, it's probably like 10%. No, I think it's 5% or 20. They're literally sitting there talking about this experiment they're about to do could destroy the planet. You just don't know. And of course it doesn't, but you just don't know. And so no one tests this hypothesis until this one analyst does. But then when they try to recreate it by doing limited things, trying to change the future, by buying, for example, a local lottery ticket, it's this small, it doesn't work. They get the numbers, they buy it, and they don't win. So now they're thinking, well, wait a minute, there's two possibilities here. Either when he bought the ticket for his friend, that was meant to happen. He didn't change the future. Or there's somebody or something acting to keep the future the way it's supposed to be, which causes a whole debate among these 20 and 30 something analysts about, well, what is this thing? Is this science? Is this fate? One person who's an atheist, a Chinese American scientist, is constantly going, isn't this what you call God? I mean, this is pretty obvious, right? And she's the only one raising that. So there's this whole backstory of what is going on exactly here and how far can we push things. Then there's a love story, which I won't talk too much about because I don't want to do any spoilers. But you end up taking a group of this like 10 characters forward through some traumatic events, in addition to a counter spy story with a woman working at CIA who decides she has been the victim of enough sexual harassment. And believe me, if you read the news stories, there's plenty of sexual harassment that goes on in CIA. That she decides to take a unique approach. Instead of complaining through the formal process, she decides to contact the Russian embassy and provide the names of people that she thinks are a problem in terms of sexual harassment to the Russians, along with what their particular problems are, so they can take care of them. She becomes a spy of sorts, but also sort of an avenging angel. And so all these characters interact amongst themselves throughout the first book, and it doesn't come to a strong conclusion. The love story does, but a lot of the other stories are still kind of hanging at the end of this first book. I've resumed losing sleep and started writing the follow-on novel, which will take this forward. And it's set in current times. I can only write so much until after the election, because the president plays a key role in this, and I didn't know who that was going to be. And it wasn't just a matter of whether it was going to be she or he. I mean, there's two different personalities involved there. It actually worked out well for me in terms of the book, because it added a whole other dimension, because I have President Trump coming back, and now they face the dilemma. There's an international crisis, and they have to convince the president to do something. And he doesn't like the intelligence community to start with. So if they come in and tell me he needs to do something, it's not going to work. So they have to tell him what they haven't told him up till now, and suffer the wrath of that, because you know how he's going to feel about not being the only person who didn't know in Washington, among, you know, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and all these other dignitaries of the other party. And he has to then take their word to do something about it. So that it added a whole other twist to the story going forward. I'll resolve a little spoiler. I'll resolve the spy counter spy story in the second book. I got to bring that to a conclusion, and a couple of other stories. And then the third book, yeah, oh yeah, because I have like 10 characters, and I want to make sure all of them get addressed, opened up, and closed in a way. We'll close up the last few of the personal stories, and then it'll be set in a place familiar to you, like Chapala. So they're going to move some of the characters here and then continue the story. And I won't go into any more than that, because it'd be spoiler alert to the extreme. Yeah, that's enough spoilers already. So anyway, that's the basics of the story. I encourage you, if you have Kindle Unlimited, especially, go on and read it for free. I'm a big believer in that. What's that? Yeah, read as many as you're interested in. I've spent plenty of books I've started and going, no, not for me. So, but if you like spy fiction, I think there's plenty of relationships in there. So that if you're, like love stories, and in fact, I considered, if someone asked me what was the basis of the three books, I would say faith, hope, and love. And the first one is love, and it's the different forms of love. If you look through the book, you can, there's 7 forms of love in Greek. I think you can find all 7 in there in different forms and comparison. The second one will be hope, and then the third one will be faith. I'll stop there. I've been talking too much already. So let me throw it open. Any questions or comments?
So how old were you when you first tried LSD?
I don't know, the Bill Clinton experience. I didn't inhale, but that wouldn't work with LSD, would it?
to make a comment, and I think he knows this, that he's read Ken's comments. The first chapter, two, we talked about government bureaucracy and living it for 38 years. The first chapter two is a little tough going because of all the acronyms, and you forget what agency was that, and what was that text? I suggest putting glossary.
Oh, I'm going to put in the second edition, which that's not true. I just got to put it on there. A glossary of acronyms, and in the next book, I'm going to put that up front. Because that's definitely a Washington DC failing after all those years there is I'm like, I know all these agencies and I can rattle them off, and it's important to someone like me because I'm like, well, this is what the FBI does and this is what the CIA does, and that would never happen here. But for other, your average reader, that's all, water under the bridge, who cares kind of stuff. So I need to put that in there so you don't get lost. I appreciate that comment.
Yeah, anyway, it's worth it to get through it. I stuck with it and after that, just the acronyms. Really great book. Thank you.
Thank you.
The link to the book is on our Facebook page.
Oh, great. Thank you. On the Facebook page.
So have you tried mushrooms?
You're gonna keep trying. I don't have a clearance anymore, so I could, but
It's not Kindle, it's something else.
yeah, if the audiobooks thing, I haven't looked into that at all. I'm not sure I have the voice for it, but maybe I'll see if I can pay someone. I do have the voice for it. Okay. I'll think about it. I hadn't even thought about it, but I will. Sure.
You mentioned that you get paid based on people reading the book. You also mentioned that Kindle can tell how many pages were read. So do you get shortchanged when you skip a couple of pages?
Don't worry about it.
It really helped you out. What happens if I read it 5 times?
If you read that book 5 times, I'll take you out to dinner. It's not that good. I have no idea. I literally we were talking the other night. I don't think we talked about this. My wife came up the other day and she goes, there's some money coming into our account. It was not much money. Okay. So there's some money coming out. Did you put something in? I go, I don't put money in anywhere. No, I take money out. I don't put money in. She goes, it's from Amazon. And I go, was it a refund? Because we got a package a day, ordering from Amazon. It must be a refund. She goes, no, it wasn't anything I refunded. And she goes, from Kindle. I go, oh, this is the royalties. This is my quarterly royalties check. Might have covered a couple people's breakfast here, but no, I have no idea how many people have read it. Again, I've done no publicity. I was talking with some friends. I'm on a board of a group in Washington that works with the intelligence community, a private organization. And I mentioned to them, and several of them were, oh, I got copies of your book, so maybe it'll spread amongst that community, and they would probably enjoy it, I think. I don't look forward to their critique of it though, because we could be merciless about things. And one of the great fears I had writing about this was submitting it to the CIA for publication review. I didn't mention this here, but I think I've told some of you before. When I was in the intelligence community, I was something of the bête noire of CIA. So I wrote an article that showed up in the Washington Post criticizing them pretty extensively, which is not usually something you do in the intelligence business. And so we always had sort of this love-hate relationship. I'm a big fan of the CIA. I never worked for the CIA. Big fan of them, and I wanted them to be better at what they do than they were. That's why I was criticizing them. And they even gave me an award for courage in writing for the article I wrote, which I thought was wonderful. I'm like, yes, you took us on and we let you live. Thank you. So I was really curious when I submitted my manuscript. I'm like, I can only imagine what this is going to come back with. And it came back with one word, redacted. And all it was the title of a program. And they said, you can use any title you want to make up, just don't use the actual title of this program. And I was like, yeah, absolutely, no problem. I just changed that one word. So I was very happy about that. Oh, let's go. Oh, I'm sorry, back to the back. We only got a microphone.
And you step into the future a couple of months and tell us what the effect of Tulsi Gabbard will have on the
Yeah, I'm really torn by Tulsi. Okay, let me say for the record, her positions on Assad and Putin are just insane. Okay, they're just wrong. You know, her idea that NATO caused Putin to invade or that Assad was, she's right that Assad was not a threat to the United States. There's plenty of things you do that don't have to be a threat to the United States. You still don't support them. That said, she's been consistent in her positions for her whole life. She was a military officer with a clearance for 20 years. She was a member of Congress from the Democratic Party for 8 years. So the people who are stepping up and saying, well, she's a national security threat, she's, you know, she's off the wall. I'm like, wait a minute. It's kind of late in the game for her to be a national security threat off the wall. She's wrong. But one of the things I learned, and I did a post on this recently, things I learned as a government bureaucrat is there are plenty of people who are flat out wrong in Washington on lots of things. And that doesn't, you know, end the way the government works. So I'm not hugely in favor of her or against her. I think she'll probably do a fine job. You got to remember the DNI is not a policy-making position. It's one of the least powerful jobs in Washington. You're supposed to tell the rest of the intelligence community how to work together. But when they created the job, they didn't give them hiring and firing authority. In the job description for this director of CIA, it says, reports to the President of the United States. Reports on his or her activities to the Director of National Intelligence. Now, for those of you that don't get that translation, when you report directly to the President of the United States, that's who tells you you're fired or you're hired, and that's the end of it. When you report on your activities, that's sort of like, hey, I want to let you know I did something. That's all it is. There's no reporting authority there that says I can hire or fire you. So the DNI job is basically a coordinator position. She can probably do fine at it. There are other nominees that I'm less sanguine about. Let's put it that way.
Be a little bit careful because we don't talk about politics.
I understand.
And Rotary.
I'll stick with policies, not politics.
I just have a comment about, I did look up how much you get per page.
There you go.
I was really curious because I thought I'm reading this and Patrick's not getting anything because I'm a member. It says you're paying 0. So there is a formula. It's based on all of the pages that are being written in every book that's on Kindle Unlimited and what percentage of pages yours have been read. And it works out roughly to half a cent per page.
So read at least 2 pages.
And it's spooky that they can watch what your eyeballs are doing from your own device. Anyhow, Patrick, so good that you're back here. It was so wonderful having you here and working with you on getting things going in Oho, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think, well, I always liked, as a kid, the Mr. Peabody show, the Wayback Machine.
The Wayback Machine, of course.
His dog and his boy Sherman. This going forward is a whole other thing. Wow. Kind of cool. I suggest if you're talking to the open circle, because you're so good at this and you get it out there and they record the entire thing, that if anyone wants to know more, and then you can sell past books, but have copies of your books and get it out there. This is not for you, but for us to expand our world, to
Sure.
think of what might be out there.
Yeah, I don't have a contact there, but don't they advertise in the
Just come and say,
Yeah,
hey,
okay. Yeah, that'd be good.
And as long as-
Okay, happy to. Okay, good. No, thank you.
TED Talks, wait.
No, I have not done TED Talks. Have to be the right topic. You gotta really think about that, because there's a good TED Talk is a lot of preparation work, and it's got to be very focused. I mean, there's time constraints and everything else, very short. So I'd have to, yeah.
It's gonna be a.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, there's a lot of work involved in those. So, yeah. Oh, okay. I'll talk to Barb after she does one and wonder how was the pain, Barb? Anything else? That just I'll close on. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. It's available, but I don't think they translate it. It's available in they maybe fill out this form, and said, how much did I want to charge in like 45 different countries, including Mexico? And I was like, I don't know. They had an option to say, just translate your dollar value into these other languages, but I don't think they translate the book though. No, I don't think I'm ready to go there yet, but maybe after a few more pennies come in. Maybe the third, maybe once again, yeah, once it gets to like Chapala, maybe it'll be popular enough at that point. I will just give a little postscript by saying, Barb covered what I said when we talked about Putin, which was immediately weeks after the invasion of Ukraine. And the point I made then was that for Putin, this war was existential. He either wins it or he's gone. And it looked like he might win it the first couple of weeks. He didn't, and so it just dragged on. He is, believe it or not, winning it now. And he's winning it because he's all in. The Russians are weathering the economy problems, the manpower losses. They're taking huge numbers of losses. But if you know anything about Russian history, the one thing they never run out of is soldiers that they're willing to kill. So they're just continuing to send them forward and die, and they're moving on. And Ukraine is all in, but not quite. I mean, you have to understand that they've done an amazing job. They've made some serious mistakes, and they still, though, are not fully mobilized. They still are not drafting anyone under the age of 25. And they're doing that, they say, because that's the future of the country, and we won't want to lose them on the battlefield. But if you lose the war, there is no future for the country. What they're really concerned about is if they start the draft down to 18, which will give them enough men. They don't have enough men right now. They simply don't have enough soldiers. If they start the draft down to 18, they're afraid that so many people are going to leave that it's going to undermine morale. Because if you're a 30-year-old fighting your third year of the war, and they start drafting 18-year-olds, and you watch as all the 18-year-olds leave to go to Poland, you're going to look around and say, why am I fighting when they all left and it's their country too? So it's a dance doing. It's very delicate, but it's why that right now they're losing. And the only good news is that the Russians are suffering so hard. I think Putin will be willing to take what he's gotten so far. I mean, that's what he did last time. He took Crimea. Yeah, took part of Ukraine once before. Took what he could get. He's got some now. He'll probably take what he can get, which will then give Ukraine a chance under some kind of armistice or peace treaty to start to rebuild and refit. So, but look for that to be negotiated out pretty soon, sir. It's not going to make a strategic difference in the war, but that's one of the mistakes that Ukraine made. If you remember, a couple months back, they invaded a part of Russia, and it was a surprise attack. They didn't coordinate it with us or anybody else. So Ukrainian forces crossed the border into Russia and occupied a piece of it. And it was a gambit. Make Putin respond, make him look bad, Russia's being occupied. The problem was with that, and probably why they didn't tell the United States or any of the other allies, is that activated a treaty Russia has with North Korea. They have a mutual self-defense treaty that says if you're attacked, I'll come to your aid. Now that's always been interpreted as Russia will come to the aid of North Korea. But guess what? Russia was able to go to North Korea and say, hey, we just got attacked. There are enemy forces on our soil. Why don't you send us 10,000 troops? And if there's one thing that North Korea can export, it's they've got plenty of them. They don't have anything for them to do. So they sent them. So they're fighting right now only inside Russia, defending Russia from Ukraine. So the advantage of that little attack is kind of weathered itself out. More importantly, for North Korean support for Russia is the artillery, different weapon systems they're sending them, because they have lots of those, and Russia needs them. They're running out. Yeah.
I don't want
Yeah, I'll be glad to do that in about 2 months. I'm laughing because I think it'll be sorted out by then. Right now, it's really up in the air. Short story is there's the Kurds in the west, or Kurds in the east, supported by the United States, there's this group coming down from the north, which is the one that just basically took Damascus. And they were allied with ISIS and with Al Qaeda at one point in time, but they've since rejected those ties and are now some kind of religious fundamentalist, but it's not clear exactly what. And there's another group in the south that was just anti-Assad, and they've all kind of met and taken over the government. But who's going to win in the long run and how they're going to act, nobody knows right now. But it's got to play itself out pretty quickly.
It could be our first speaker of 2000.
You got to give me that's too soon in January. I won't look prescient by that point in time, ma'am. No, it's a small number of ground forces there, so soldiers. They had some ships which they evacuated. It's a huge problem for Russia because that was their main port they were using, and it's gone. They're talking about trying to negotiate with this new group to at least be able to use the port, but no one's sure how that's going to work out. So yeah, it won't help them much. It's more of a loss for them, in that they lost a lot of prestige by being chased out of the country, and that, you know, it's the only reason Assad was still in power after the last time the revolt happened was Russia and Hezbollah and Iran supported it. Once they stopped, it was over. That was a church
There we go.
A big applause to Patrick.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Patrick, can you stay on for a moment with me afterwards?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Great speaker, as always. I remember your last, big applause. I remember your last